Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the OneSpot podcast. You probably recognize my guest, Dr. Ryan Ames, because we just recorded a podcast, and in chatting, we decided to maybe do another one and dig a little bit deeper into interpretation and report and proper documentation on that sort of thing. So I want to thank Dr. Ames for joining me again. I'm taking up more of his time in a very busy schedule, but I really appreciate you spending a little more time with me.
Oh, it's always fun to talk about documentation and coding. It's everyone's
Woo!
dream.
Billing and coding.
Woo!
Uh, an important topic. You need to document for your
Critical.
patient to get paid. Yes, yes. So, interpretation and report, we thought we would dig in a little bit deeper. And my first question, I thought just to kick things off, is what specific tests would need interpretation and report? And is there a way to check specifically to see if something does need interpretation and report?
Yeah, I'll get that question when I lecture or in email going, hey, how do I know if it needs an interpretation report? And I always try not to sound condescending when I give the answer uh, because it's very, very simple. Right in the CPT book, it will say fundus photography with interpretation and report.
Hmm. It says right in the
That's the
book.
clue. It says it right in the book, right in the definition. If it doesn't say with interpretation and report, then it doesn't need one. But as a general rule, if it's an additional test that you're going to bill for on top of the office visit, it probably requires an interpretation and report. Um, in worst case scenario, you'd over document it, and that
Sure,
doesn't get you in trouble.
sure.
So writing that interpretation report, I think, is important, and what you put in it is important because there are requirements on that. Uh, uh, I'll look at when I do friendly audits for colleagues. Interpretation reports go one or two ways. Either the person writes a novel that includes every little measurement from the OCT, printout or the scan,
All the
and
findings.
yeah, all the findings, and it takes like 5 minutes to read like no change. Oh, that would have been good 3 paragraphs ago. That would have been fantastic. Or you get one and it just goes OCT, WNL, within normal limits.
Within normal. Mm.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, in optometry school, we learned, WNL stands for we never looked. All right. Um, so within normal limits. Okay, that's great, but you do need a little more detail than that. So in documentation report, it needs to be complete, but it can also be concise. And that's what I tell patients about tell our colleagues about any sort of medical record documentation. You need complete information, but being concise is really appreciated because you shouldn't have to spend 10 minutes looking over a patient's record to know what's happening. There should be the cliff notes version in there. Good data, but be concise, don't be too verbose. So in an interpretation report for all of the tests, every additional diagnostic test we do, it's as simple as the 4 R's. Um, and so the first thing before the R's is you need an order for the test. So you
Okay.
need to write down an order somewhere. And that order
Can
can
that be
be,
done the same day or isn't okay.
yeah, absolutely. And then you can include the order kind of in your interpretation report. Say ordered MAC OCT for, whatever, macular degeneration, cystic macular edema, whatever it is. But it can also be done the visit before. So for a stable macular degeneration patient, you can write in today's plan, return in 6 months for MAC OCT for progression evaluation or progression analysis. And now that order's in the previous chart.
Gotcha.
So if you ever get audited and they go, hey, where's the order? You did OCT on the 15th, but where's the order? Like, oh, 6 months ago. You can see it in my interpretation or see it in my plan. So that order can be, you know, pre-appointed,
Sure.
and that's totally justifiable. But then once you get to the interpretation report, you need 4 R's. You need the reason for the test, the reliability of the test, the results of the test, and the recommendations based on those results. And so it's as simple as those things. So you need to write down why you did it. So dry mac or OCT for dry macular degeneration evaluation. So that's the reason you did the MAC OCT. Then you have to write whether it was a reliable OCT, and you can really write down just reliable scan. You don't have to go in and record all this stuff. Or record a bunch of details about it. I'll see colleagues just write, um, on OCTs, they'll give you a scan quality variable, and
Oh,
everyone's
right,
different, but
right.
like 9 out of 10. Yeah, they'll write down 9 out of 10. Okay, that means there were a lot of opacities, but did the scan hit the macula or did it hit the optic nerve?
Sure.
Not a reliable
Can I get an
scan.
image of what I was looking for?
Yeah, you missed. So it's not reliable. It was a good scan quality, but looking in the wrong thing. So you need to say whether it's reliable or not. Then you need to write down the results from it. And the results are what the findings. And
Mm,
um, and just recording the raw data numbers, like macula, 80 micron, whatever the finding is, that really, those aren't really the results. That data I can get from the printout. What the
mhm.
interpretation and report is the clinical thought process that you went
What the
through
significance
after
of
you
it
get
is.
the data.
Yeah,
Right. What does this mean? You're just, recording back into your EHR all these numbers. Well, what do they mean? So what you really need to write down is, geographic atrophy, um, no change, or 3 microns change in retinal thickness, or whatever it is, and then saying what that means. There's progression of macular degeneration, geographic atrophy progressing, closer to, the phobia. That's the results.
gotcha.
I, you need to put the thought process in it. Process. If I wanted the numbers, well, I just look at the OCT. That the data's already there. So you got to put the doctor hat on when you write your interpretation report. And then the last part of it is recommendations. So now that you have this information, what is that going to do for your treatment plan? So you have this stable or progression happening. Okay, now what happens? Stable. Return to clinic in 6 months for repeat. Reminded patients to take AREDS2 supplementation. Yeah. Whatever it is. So you have to have your recommendations and what you're going to do with that information. So reliability, or the reason for the test, the reliability of the test, the results of the test, and the recommendations. So that can be pretty simple. So like one of the examples I use in one of the articles I wrote is for a Mac OCT. I put down early AMD baseline testing. So as initial diagnosis, so my test was or reason for the test was baseline testing. Good quality scan, reliable. That's the reliability. The results were mild RPE dispersion, no neo or fluid. So now I'm describing what I saw on the OCT. And then the recommendations are start AREDS2 supplementation, repeat in 6 months for progression, or
Perfect.
progression evaluation or analysis. So it's very short. You don't have to spend 5 minutes writing an INR. You should be able to pound it out pretty darn quick for most scenarios. A lot of interpretation,
Sure.
but pretty darn quick. Uh, but you have to hit those things, and just writing WNL, that doesn't mean anything.
And it didn't
It
take
can,
much longer to do probably what you just explained than
no,
WNL. Yeah.
yeah. If you had a MRI for some reason and you get the report from the radiologist and it just said WNL, you'd be like, I paid a lot
Did
of money for
what?
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So so that's the interpretation report. And then when you have an OCT, billing it is now a question if you don't find something on
I was
it.
gonna say, what if there was nothing? You ordered something, they were a suspect, you order a test like an OCT, and then everything is within normal limits and you don't notice anything.
Yeah, so for glaucoma, there are glaucoma suspect codes and ocular hypertensive codes. So those are that's a easy way to go
Easier one.
for that, because they're a high risk glaucoma suspect. So that's very justifiable. But I think all of us have had those patients that kind of have unexplained reduction in vision. Like,
Mhm.
man, cornea looks clear, lens looks clear, vitreous looks clear, retina kind of looks fine, but the person can't see as well. I'm going to run an OCT and to see if their macular structure is normal. It's hard to see a lot of subtle macular changes. Um, I've had patients with epiretinal membranes that I could hardly see on a dilated exam, and then I do an OCT, and it looks like looks like the moon, and it's insane. So you run an OCT, but sometimes you do that OCT, MAC OCT, and you don't find anything. It's a totally normal retina. Now what do you do?
Yeah.
Well, there aren't any rule out codes. So you can't say, oh,
Mm,
I was suspecting macular edema. So I'm going to put diagnosis code macular edema and bill for it. This is one of those scenarios where somebody will say, oh, but I got paid. Right. Until they audit and go like, but there was no macular edema. Why
right.
did you bill that to it? So you have to use symptom codes
Okay.
if it's on the LCD, the local coverage determination. Unfortunately, for Mac OCT, there aren't a lot of symptom codes. Like blurred vision is not one of our choices. There is the code visual distortion of shape and size. So
Hmm.
if someone comes in and say, hey, there's things are kind of crooked in my left eye. If you do the OCT and you don't find anything, you can use that H53.15 code. That's okay. But if it's just blurred vision, well, there isn't a diagnosis code you can use if the retina ends up looking fine. So you have two choices in that scenario. One is you can have the patient, before you do the test, sign an ABN, an advanced beneficiary notice. And that's telling the patient, saying, hey, there's a justifiable reason for me to do this test, but I don't know if it's going to get paid or not. And it kind of depends on the scenario. Like, you have these symptoms. I think this is rational, but the insurance company might not pay for this. And now the patient signs it and says, okay, if they don't pay it, I will. So that you're setting the patient up for patient responsibility, and that's totally justifiable. If you're like most of us and me, if I run a scan because I'm just suspicious and I'm not really sure, if I don't find anything, I'm like, you're probably not going to charge for it. Besides taking a few minutes to run the scan, running an additional scan on your OCT doesn't cost you anything. So it's not like there's a click charge on
Right.
OCTs. And if the patient gets a surprise bill, that's not a really good business choice. Is it justifiable to get paid for the service? Yeah, because there was a reason you did the test. But ultimately, that $32 you missed out on is probably not worth angering the patient. You'll lose a lot more money in the long run for that. So it's probably either have the patient sign an ABN and warn them, because patients don't usually get mad if they get a bill that they expected.
Sure.
They get real upset when they get a bill. They were like, wait a second, you just ran this test. You never told me it was going to cost me $70. Um, that's where they get crabby. So if there is no diagnosis that meets, that's on the LCD, either you don't charge or you warn the patient ahead of time. But you can't use a rule out code that just does not exist.
Today's episode is brought to you by OneSpot Billing Software. When a single doctor practice lost their part-time biller, AR quickly climbed past 25%. Taking billing into their own hands, the doctor turned to OneSpot and within months brought their AR down to just 5%. OneSpot gives practices the clarity and control they need to collect what they're owed. Visit onespotbilling.com/offer25 to book a demo and receive a $25 Amazon gift card. Today's episode is brought to you by OneSpot Billing Software. When a two-doctor practice suddenly lost their biller and their practice administrator went on medical leave, their AR shot up to over 30%. A new biller was doing everything she could, but couldn't make a dent. After implementing OneSpot, AR dropped to 15% in just a few months and now hovers around 5%. OneSpot Billing gives teams the clarity they need to collect what you're owed. Visit onespotbilling.com/offer25 to book a demo and receive a $25 Amazon gift card. But I know one of the other topics we had mentioned was the 99211 codes. So I don't know if you have a second for that, but I want to make sure
Yeah.
that anything else that you wanted to add on documentation for interpretation or report.
Now, kind of ancillary to that is the level one office visit, and that's a
Yeah.
non physician office visit. Um, you don't use those a ton, but sometimes doctors, just because of schedule wise, they'll have patients come in before their appointments and have photos or OCTs or visual fields done on a totally separate day than when they meet with the doctor to have the test done. And in those scenarios, some doctors will then bill a tech visit, is what they call it, and they use 99211. That is not what it's for. The work in the office for that test, with a visual field, for example, that's part of the visual field code. So that's part of the 92083, I think it is. So that's part of the visual field code. Just because the technician saw them on a day that the doctor didn't see them doesn't mean you get a bill an extra office visit. If there was clinical reason for an office visit by a technician that day, then you do bill a code, but it's separate from the OCT or visual field or whatever it is. And what that means is, so let's say I had a patient who um, uh, we couldn't get a visual field the day they came in for their glaucoma check for whatever reason. And I said, hey, it's not an emergency, but I want to get a visual field done. So let's find another time for you to do that. Also, your eye pressure is up a little bit. So I'm going to change to a different glaucoma medication. When you come in for that visual field, I'm not going to be there, but my tech is going to do the visual field, and I'm going to have him double check the pressure
Pictures.
and check the IOP for me. And I'll take a look later. If the IOP looks better, then we'll keep with the medication. Okay, now there's an office visit, right? There was a clinical reason for the tech to do something additional, meaning taking IOPs. And that could be, visual acuities. It could be taking an additional history, something in addition to that OCT visual field, whatever. So you have to make sure that there's justification for a non-doctor related office visit. Just because the tech was there on a non-doctor day, that doesn't mean you get paid for the office visit or the level one, because you wouldn't have billed a level one if they would have had that test done on the day you were there. Does that make sense?
I think
That
so.
nuance?
I love your analogies. They help me so that, like, if the field machine was broken the day they
Right.
were there and they had to come back for it, you wouldn't bill a second visit.
Correct. Yeah, you wouldn't bill an extra office visit if all
Changing
the office visit
medications,
care was
additional
struck.
IOPs makes complete sense. That's a follow-up. The patient has to come in. You couldn't have done it the first day. It needs to the patient's medication needs a month or
Correct.
whatever to kick in, and then you would bring it in. So, yeah,
Yeah,
I think I
exactly.
got it. Any other examples that you can think of or
I think that's it.
Mhm. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you breaking all this down for us. I get so many questions on specific information like by payer, and then there's the questions
Right.
like just the general documentation and coding. I will say I noticed you referenced that book a couple of times. Is does that change every year? Do people have to get new copies of that every year?
I
Or
I do because I love the smell of a new CPT book every year. It's what I look forward to. Um,
it's like a football playbook. We need to make them in miniature and people can wear them on their wrists and
Yeah, but so CPT and ICD-10, those are updated every single year, and there are changes. So
okay.
if you may not need a new CPT book in all reality every single year, but if you go look, and one, you don't have one. Um, yeah, whenever somebody asks a question about a definition or what code should I use, it's like, well, look in CPT. Actually, look in the book. Don't just Google it, because I've Googled things or used AI, and it gives me codes that actually don't even exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, or it pulls a reference from some social media group that some doctor wrote up, because it goes, oh, I found that code and this was the definition next to it. It wasn't actually the definition. Someone just made that up. So you need to go to the primary reference, primary resource. So if your CPT book says 2002 on it,
Get a new one.
maybe it's time to update. It's been a couple decades. So I always have a brand new one in my office, and then because I do some of this stuff, I always take last year's and I bring it to my home office.
Ah, there you
So
go.
I always got the these relatively recent one, because the definitions do change. They add codes, they delete codes, and having that resource is the important part.
Well, it is sure a lot to keep track of. And we do appreciate you helping us break it down. I know because I talk to people, it's so funny. I'll be at a meeting. People say, "Oh, I listened to your podcast." And I'm like, "Oh gosh, hopefully it wasn't super annoying. I have such great guests. So I know we have good topics." But it is interesting because I have heard from people that are just figuring things out. They're teaching themselves a lot of the
Right.
stuff or they're taking classes. One of the people that I've been speaking to recently, she's in a class, she's taking it on. And it's nice because we have a wide range of people that are like, nope, I've been doing this for a long time. It's still helpful to have somebody break some of the stuff down. And then the new people who are figuring out as well. So we do appreciate you breaking it down for us.
Good. I hope everyone got a little bit out of it.
Awesome. And thank you for spending time with me.
Of course.